there was a pretty viral clip of Asmongold being shown on Twitter lately that has been making its rounds in the WoW community, talking about how to save World of Warcraft. And now everybody kind of has their opinion on how to save WoW. And Asmongold is probably the most notable WoW content creator. Him and Sodapop and S-Fan obviously all have their roots in WoW in some capacity and are some of, if not the largest WoW content creators. And so their voice holds a lot of value whenever it's spoken, whenever they tend to talk about WoW. And Asmongold recently had a take on how to fix WoW. And we can kind of take a listen to see what he says, and then I can kind of talk about what I think about this.
As I said, here's how to fix WoW. Reset everybody's spells, and then remake every class with like 10 spells or less. Number 1. Number 2, remove all raiding difficulties except for 40-man raids. And then make 40-man raids of the relative same difficulty as like Old War hard modes. Make them easier and make it to where there's way more people. Number 3, remove all add-ons with no exceptions. That's about it, actually.
All right, so let's kind of talk about a bunch of different stuff that I've seen in regards to this tweet, because this tweet has actually sparked a lot of controversy where a lot of people are weighing in and having opinions. And if you look at this tweet right here at the bottom, Gingy goes, "This is more of a list of things that would destroy WoW." Sleepback goes, "Brother, stop. 40-man rating is something that no one wants. You lost me there." Asmongold goes, "The only audience that retail WoW caters to anymore is hardcore sweaty nerds that want to contrive the game into an esports or a career," basically implying that nobody's playing the game because of their just in general enjoyment for the game, only implying that they are playing it just for, you know, just being a hardcore sweaty nerd with the aspirations of going pro. I've seen a couple of takes like this where they'll link Asmongold's account or they'll link Asmongold's Twitter and be like, just go through his boss kills and Mythic Plus runs throughout the 3 to 4 expansions. He's only actively participated in 2 tiers. Every other tier he got carried in for 1 kill and never ran it again, but people put his opinion to a higher standard. And frankly, he is probably the largest creator that's ever came out of WoW. And so, yeah, his opinion is going to be held to a higher standard. It just is what it is. In addition to that, he does actively play, you know, Classic. He hasn't been playing WoW as much, and particularly retail. He hasn't been playing retail as much lately. But I think that even people who have played in the WoW in the past, but they don't really play it right now, their opinion still does matter. So I don't love like the dismissive attitude towards his opinion, but I do think that there's a lot of faults in his opinion that kind of come from the fact that he hasn't actively participated in retail as much lately. And these potentially, the things that he's talking about are things that would maybe bring him back to retail, but we'll kind of talk about that just as we get further into the video. I've also seen this other take from Stay Safe where he says, Asmongold doesn't even play WoW anymore, his opinion doesn't matter. Actually, I'd say his opinion matters even more. In reality, there are more people who have played WoW and quit for a multitude of reasons than there are currently still playing. The opinions of these people should be listened to in an effort to improve the game, given that so many of them. And he draws a diagram. I actually tend to agree with this, where Asmongold's opinion does matter. I think that everybody who's ever played WoW, their opinion matters in some capacity. And it doesn't matter more if they've quit or if they actively play, but you have to kind of have some level of nuance to the opinions. Asmongold, and I actually have a major problem with a couple of the things that he's going to say. And this is why that I'm making this video. He's speaking as an authority on retail WoW and kind of giving things and saying things that players don't necessarily want who actively play retail every day. And then he says it that the audiences of WoW is just catering to hardcore sweaty nerds who are just trying to turn it into an esports career. He's also made takes on his stream multitude of times that he hates the current state of, you know, metagaming in video games. And obviously he's talking about, you know, going back to 40-man raids, and he's talking about deleting add-ons and all this other stuff. And for me, it seems like even if Blizzard kind of went through and did all these things that Asmongold is asking, we're never going back to, you know, 2008. We're never going back to 2010, where he's trying to kind of take the game. And like life isn't going to go back to how it was back then. And there's still, you know, like Stay Safe is even talking about so many people who've quit WoW who still love the game, but they've just quit for a multitude of reasons, and not really much that Blizzard is going to do to, improve the game is going to bring them back. And so let's talk about point by point what Asmongold says here.
Here's how to fix WoW. Reset everybody's spells, and then remake every class with like 10 spells or less.
While I do agree that there's actually a decent amount of button bloat in the current state of the game, remaking every single class with only 10 buttons or less is going to change the game to be a fundamentally different game. If you want a game that's like that, you can play a bunch of other MMOs. You can play a MOBA that only has a few buttons. But one of the big allures to WoW is just like the complexity of classes. That's kind of been one of the largest allures to WoW basically ever. It's just kind of how complex talent trees were. It's like, being able to discover your own builds. It's kind of being able to do different things with different talents, different setups, and having a lot of buttons and a lot of utility does affect that. And whenever I say that maybe we should be looking to prune abilities, I'm talking about, removing like a couple of buttons, going from, probably like, 7, 8, 9, 10 rotational buttons and, 15 or 20 situational buttons down to 10 buttons total. That's going to be a fundamentally different game, and not many people are asking for that. Whenever they're talking about button pruning, they're talking about, oh, I have too many niche abilities that I press occasionally but don't really press that often, and maybe those could go. And that, that's reasonable. There could be some button pruning in WoW. We saw it after Warlords of Draenor that Blizzard was like, oh yeah, the game is just a bit too much right now, we think that it needs to go back. And that happens. It happens in cycles, and Blizzard might take this as valid criticism, but what Asmongold is saying, I think, is completely off base with what most players are looking for.
Number 1. Number 2, remove all raiding difficulties except for 40-man raids, and then make 40-man raids of the relative same difficulty as like Old War hard modes.
Okay, as somebody who's relatively detached from, average raiders, but like I still ran a PvE podcast and was trying to make sure that I got enough knowledge from, average raiders to really understand where they were kind of coming from and get a bunch of nuance to this. This is very detached from the average player's experience. The average player, what they're actually looking for is, mythic or heroic to actually be reduced in raid size, not increased, because it's incredibly hard to create a group of friends that's a 20-player group to be able to get into this content, much less a 40-player group. Maybe if the content was completely trivial, you could reasonably go up to like a 40-person raid. That would be sick if the content's completely trivial. But whenever content is relatively challenging, getting 20 or even 40 people together on a regular basis to be able to run the raid is just not something that's super common. For me personally, one of the biggest reasons that I took a step back from raiding is because like I just wasn't having too much fun with it. And I think the social structure was like a large part of that, where if I have like a friend group of like 5 or 6 people, if we could actually get 4 other friends or mutuals that we wanted together and actually be able to run a raid, that would actually be super sick if it was only 10 players. But since it's 20, then we have to get 15 additional people or 14 additional people, and that kind of falls out of the realm of possibility. And so then going to 40, oh, I have a group of 5 or 6 close friends, we need to get 34 people to run a raid. Like that's just not within the realm of possibility. And honestly, that's not what players want. Players really have been striving for, and if you've been listening to them, they've been striving for lower player count content. And I think that Blizzard probably needs to bite the bullet and reduce the player size of Mythic to be able to get to that. And because Heroic being flex size is completely awesome and all, but there's nothing past Heroic.
Make them easier.
He also says consolidate raid difficulties. I don't think there's any issue with the raid difficulties as it currently stands. LFR is for people who aren't playing as like serious. They want to just like kind of experience the raid. That's awesome. Normal is just like a slight step up. Heroic's a slight step above that. And then Mythic is obviously for like the most hardcore and sweaty of nerds, right? Which, it is what it is. But like consolidating raid difficulties just doesn't make sense because the raid difficulty structure is totally fine as it currently stands.
Get to where there's way more people. Number 3. Remove all add-ons with no exceptions.
I think that this is the one that maybe has the most merit out of all of his arguments. Add-ons are incredibly problematic for the game, but at the same point, I think that there's a lot of other larger problems to the game that Blizzard needs to address before add-ons. And frankly, I think we're in a bit too deep to actually remove them. Again, this kind of falls in the same vein as like the first category, where we're just playing we would be playing a completely different game if they did these things. Not that like we would be playing WoW too. Like if they made major structural changes to the game or something like that. that would be what it is. But what he's trying to do whenever he's implying all these things or asking for all these things is trying to change World of Warcraft into a game that it's not. And I do understand that he's quit. His opinion does matter. But we're not going back to the way it was back in 2004. We're not going back to Classic WoW. They re-released Classic WoW, and Classic WoW was different, and people complained about it because it was different than how they remember it, right? Nostalgia is arguably the most powerful thing in a lot of instances. But for add-ons, and the reason I think this point probably has the most merit out of all of them, is I think that a lot of players struggle to get the right add-ons or the right help that they need from their third-party tools. But I think from Blizzard's perspective, any development third-party players are going to do to help improve your game significantly is awesome. There's a lot of UI stuff with WoW that's just not very good, and removing add-ons would be just a straight detriment. And I think we're, again, a bit in too deep. I will say, whenever I started the game, and it's been about 10 years at this point, like 9 or 8 or so, I thought that add-ons were very overwhelming, and I didn't know what I needed, and I didn't use add-ons for a while, and it was just like a bit of a problem. But jumping into it was hard. But I don't think we can necessarily go back. I will say that the improvements that they made to the base UI, awesome. Gosh, I had another point about add-ons, but I can't remember exactly what it was. Yeah, but I mean, that's basically it. I do think that there's maybe a little bit more merit to the add-on discussion that he's talking about, but I think completely removing them is a problem. Oh, I remember what it was. People also cite that players struggle to get into the game because of add-ons in general, and because like the overhead on, you know, just jumping into the game is too high. That kind of deters people from jumping in. I do think that's partially true, but I think a larger portion of why like new players aren't really jumping into WoW is first and foremost the model of how WoW works. A $60 base game and a $15 a month sub, you're just not going to attract young audiences typically with a game like that, especially whenever there's a lot of free-to-play options, right? And then whenever they're watching TikTok, their favorite TikTok creator is building Rome in 45 seconds on Fortnite. Of course, WoW is going to struggle to compete versus that. But I think that, you know, the model doesn't really allow new people that would be otherwise interested in MMOs to like kind of jump in for free, but instead you have to pay, you know, $75 up front. That's typically going to be a larger limiting factor than at least an add-on in getting people involved. Because I think WoW is such a great game that once you actually get started and you have friends that play, like not playing solo, but if you have friends that play and you're playing with them, this is a very special game. And I think that what Asmongold is doing, while I think his opinion, you know, that is his opinion probably, I don't even know if it would bring him back to the game. That's a question that I would have to ask him, and he would. But like, if Blizzard even did these things, is he coming back to retail WoW? I think the answer is probably not even yes. I think the answer is probably still no. And like, even if Blizzard did go through all these suggestions and took them seriously, the people who are saying these things probably still aren't coming back. And that's just the reality situation. That's why I think what Asmongold was saying on stream the other day about WoW is just, in the current state of retail WoW, is just not correct. And I think that Blizzard's actually been doing a great job. I thought they did a great job during Dragonflight of making the game incredibly fun to play. I think as a content creator, it's been a bit tough to make great content for the game, all in all. But I think as a player, it's been the best it's been in a few expansions. Overall, those are just my thoughts. Everybody's allowed to have an opinion. I'm interested in hearing yours down in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.